First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening, both our panelists and our audience as well. Tonight, we welcome Justin Lawrence and Dave Primus, who are going to be talking about a number of things. Both sit on the Gunnison County Preservation Commission and have been deeply involved in many of the projects that have helped preserve history in our county and also outside of our county. Just want to let everybody know to consider becoming a member of the Crested Butte Museum. You can go to crestedbuttemuseum.com to find out about memberships and all the benefits there. So sign up to be a member, sign up for our newsletter to be the first ones to find out about events like this. We're going to be doing all kinds of very fun stuff, both virtually and in person this summer, of course, safely. First of all, next week, we've got the 4th installment of our National Preservation Month speaker series. We welcome Jody Reeser and Dave Primus again, who will be talking about projects specific to the city of Gunnison. They'll be discussing the 8th Street School and the Gunnison Hardware Building, which is the Center for the Arts now, and the work that went into those. Both buildings that look beautiful now. We're also going to be holding our annual Black and White Ball. It's going to be a virtual party on Sunday, June 28th. There's going to be a lot involved. We're going to be putting out many more announcements and much more information over the coming weeks, so be sure to keep your eye out for that. We're also going to have a speaker series immediately following the end of the National Preservation Month speaker series featuring Dwayne, who's going to be talking on a number of topics, everything from ranching to water to the railroad and much more. So again, be sure to keep an eye out for that speaker or that series that's going to be coming up and be running through the entire summer. So again, become a member to be the first one to find out and to also get discounts to all these events and all these things that we're doing as well. Let's see, a little bit of information. If you guys if any of the attendees have questions, please put them either in the chat or in the Q&A. We're gonna have time, 15 minutes at the end of this session to be able to answer questions if you have them for David, Dwayne, or Justin. With that, I'd like to say, Dwayne, Justin, Dave, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for telling us more history. I'm very excited to learn about all this stuff. This is all very new to me. So Dwayne, I'm gonna pass it off to you, Dr. Dwayne Vandenbush, who's gonna begin with a short history of some of the stuff we're talking about tonight.
Thank you, Nell. My introduction is going to talk a little bit about some of the areas that Justin and Dave will talk about, and I'm going to start off with the Alpine Tunnel. The Alpine Tunnel came out of a great railroad race between the Denver and Rio Grande of William Jackson Palmer and John Evans, the ex-governor of Colorado, who ran the Denver, South Park, and Pacific. And in the year 1880, actually a little before that, as the Gunnison country began to open and looked like it was going to boom with one great mining town after another coming up, both railroads wanted to get in here first. And William Jackson Palmer's railroad ran over Marshall Pass down into Sargent's and then arrived in Gunnison in August of '81. The South Park surveyors looked over Cottonwood Pass, Tin Cup Pass, a whole bunch of passes. None really was to their liking, and as a result, they decided to bore a tunnel underneath Altman Pass, which is almost 12,000 feet. And Altman Pass had the great towns of St. Elmo and Romley and Hancock on the east side, and then the booming Pitkin on the west side of the Continental Divide. Tremendous amount of money was spent just building roads to where you would build the east and west portal of the tunnel. And the west portal of the tunnel was called Atlantic because it was on the east side of the divide. The west portal was called Pacific because it was on the Pacific side or the west side of the divide. Cabins were built for the workers on both sides of the Continental Divide. In Atlantic, their names were Ragtop, Streeters, and Millers. And there were also cabins that were kind of unnamed on the Pacific side. Work began in the winter with 40-mile-an-hour winds, 30, 40 degree below zero temperatures, and just blizzards. And it's beyond me why the South Park wanted to work in the winter, but they worked in both the winter and the summer. It was an estimation that 10,000 men worked on the Alpine Tunnel. Very few lasted more than 3 or 4 days. And the railroad paid to bring guys in. And the amount of people who were there at one time numbered between 300 and 400 working on the railroad. But as I said, very few of them were there for that length of time. When they began digging underneath Altman Pass, they thought they would find firm granite, but they didn't. They found decomposing granite, and that really caused a lot of problems. And what they had to do was bring in 500,000 board feet of redwood timber and another 1.5 million feet of other timber to timber and hold the Alpine Tunnel. When a foreman was asked what would happen if the two sides who were boring didn't meet, he made the famous comment, "Then we'll have 2 tunnels." On July the 26th, 1881, the 2 crews met in the middle and they were 11/100ths of an inch off. The tunnel was 1,771 feet long. It had 400 feet of snow sheds on both the east and the west side. And it had big doors on both sides to be closed so the wind wouldn't blow the snow in and cover up the tracks. And whenever the train approached the tunnel on either side, it blew the whistle and the doors opened. The Alpine Tunnel was the highest railroad tunnel in the world at 11,523 feet in elevation. There was no ventilation in the tunnel, and the railroaders worried a lot about that. And as a matter of fact, in 1895, a work train came in there to knock out some debris that had fallen over the tracks, and 4 men died of asphyxiation, as the smoke and the gas didn't allow air to get in there, and they died right in the tunnel. The tunnel was closed from 1888 to 1895 because of rockfall. It was very difficult to keep that tunnel open. Tremendous snow on both sides and then tremendous problems right at the tunnel. At the west portal was an engine house which could hold 6 engines. It was 54 feet wide and 153 feet long. You had a large coal bin, a water tank, a bunkhouse, a storehouse, a section house, and a telegraph office. It cost $300,000 to build the tunnel, and that would be in the many millions by today's standards. As one came down from the tunnel into Pitkin, you descended 13 miles from 11,523 feet down to 9,200 feet in Pitkin. And as you came down past a tremendous rock wall that was built without mortar, called the Palisades. 450 feet long, 50 feet up and down, just a masterful piece of work. And unfortunately, a rock slide has come in and that road is closed now, about 3.3 miles from the tunnel. The South Park Railroad closed the Alpine Tunnel for good in 1910. Too tough to keep open, too much competition from the Rio Grande, and a lot less traffic now that the mining boom had ended. So the days of the Alpine Tunnel were over. Just a personal comment. When I first came here in 1962, for the first 5 or 6 years, I and some of my friends got into the tunnel 7 or 8 times. You would slide down through a little hole about 20 feet and then get into the tunnel, and you could walk 2/3 of the way through it till a rock slide hit about 1/3 of the way from the east portal. And the first time I got in there, I had a headlamp on and hip boots on, and I got down to the bottom and I turned my head to the left, and there's giant white algae on the walls that look like giant spiders, and I think I set the world record for a high jump. Taylor Park, got a minute or two to go here. The Valley of the Gods, 30 miles by 8 miles. Saguache Range in the east, Taylor Canyon in the west, Taylor Park in the north, and Cumberland Pass and Tin Cup in the south. Jim Taylor came in 1861, a placer miner named Taylor Park. Fred Lottis followed him in 1861, and Union Park is named by him because he was a Union man when the Civil War broke out. A number of towns existed in Taylor Park: Bowman and Dorchester and Emma and Hillerton and Abbeville and Tin Cup and Garfield, all great possible silver and gold towns. From 1935 to 37, the Taylor Dam was built. It cost $2.3 million. It's 185 feet high, and it backs up 106,200 acre-feet of water, which is owned by the Uncompahgre water users around Montrose. They can call for that water whenever they want. A word or two on Pieplant. Pieplant is located towards the north end of the park. You go between the Taylor Park Trading Post and Dorchester, and Pieplant is kind of about in the middle. It is a creek that comes off the Saguache Range in the east, and it was named for the abundant wild rhubarb that grew there. Placer miners panned gold there in the 1860s, and then again in the 1880s and the 1890s. In 1903, the Woods Mining Company, excited about gold prospects in the area, built, and I can't believe this, but this was a newspaper account, a 100 stamp mill along Pieplant Creek, 280 feet long, 110 feet wide, handling 200 tons of ore a day. A sawmill came to supply lumber for the mill with 50 men working in the sawmill. Soon a town grew up on either side of the creek. 40 men working at the mine and 50 at the mill. Pieplant got a post office in 1903. And down at the mouth of the creek, a saloon and a stopping place existed. Pieplant died in 1910 when the gold played out. And today only ruins exist. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Justin Lawrence, the zone archaeologist of the Forest Service, Dave Primus, historian, premier par excellence of the Gunnison country, and they will talk about preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction of historic structures in and around the Gunnison country. So Dave and Justin, you're on.
Thank you,
Okay,
Brian.
how do I make mine the big screen then? Is that you now?
If you go ahead and do the share screen like you did before, and you are the main screen currently.
Oh,
So
okay,
whoever-
great.
yeah.
Well, I'll start off with that and then I'll share my screen afterwards. Thank you all for being here. My name's Justin. I'm the zone archaeologist with the Forest Service, and I've been here since 2001 now, so 19 years working on this forest, the GMUG, which is the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, and Gunnison. So for those of you in Telluride, I also have worked on the Uncompahgre down in your area as well, on Trout Lake Trestle, and Vance Junction, and things like that. I'm also a member of the Gunnison County Historic Preservation Commission, as well as Dave. I'll give a little plug on that real quick, that we're here to help the whole county, whether it's public or private entities. If they have a property that they'd like to list, or they need letters of support from our CLG, we'd be happy to assist them, and that's what we're here for. And yeah, we're right here to help. My joke is that I've been on way too many Zoom and Microsoft Team meetings, and I feel like Max Headroom from the 80s on Cinemax. When I'm on these things, it's like a bobbly head. But besides that, let's get to the gist of it. What I'm talking about this evening is the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. And what this comes up with is, how this normally starts is we see some structure or building, and all of a sudden we fall in love with it. And we want to know how to save it. And so there's a lot of questions you have to ask first. And what's the level of significance of the building? What's the physical condition of the building? What is your proposed use for the building in the future? And what are the code and other regulations that would be required for whatever reuse you want to be? obviously money's an issue, but you need to think about these 4 things first before you even consider raising funds and things like that. So once you've sorted those questions out, then it comes down to the other 4 variables, the treatment standards you want to do. And I'm not going to read the entire definition for each one, but I'll just read the first sentence of each one, because there is quite a difference between the 4 treatment standards. Preservation is defined as the act or process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. So I'll give examples of each one of these that I've done on the forest and how one's preservation, one is rehabilitation, one is reconstruction as we go through. Rehabilitation is defined as the act or process of making possible a compatible use of a property through repair, alterations, and additions, while preserving those portions or features which convey its historic or architectural values. So there is a difference between each of these. Restoration is defined as an act or process of accurately depicting the form or features and character of a property as it appeared at a particular period of time, by means of the removal of features from other periods in its history and reconstruction of missing features from the restoration period that you're trying to match. And then finally, there's reconstruction, which is, fairly obvious. It defines the act or process depicting by means of new construction the form, features, and detailing of a non-surviving structure or building for the purpose of replicating the appearance at a specific period of time. Are those 4 definitions kind of clear? I guess we have everyone on mute, so I can't. So here, I'll get on with this slideshow kind of showing examples of those 4 different treatments: preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. Why is it not letting me skip to the next slide? There we go. All right, I made that. Here's some of the projects we're going to look at today. I added a few more slides at the very end of some other examples, but what is historic preservation? Here I only have 2 levels of action when there's actually the 4. But these are the 2 we normally do on the forest, and it was particular to this. So rehabilitation is compatible use for an old structure. It'd be similar to like the Crescent Butte Museum is a good example of an old structure. You're fixing it up, but you need to make it usable and trying to use some in-kind materials as much as possible. Fort Uncompahgre is another example. That's reconstruction. Fort Uncompahgre was totally gone, and they just totally rebuilt this from scratch with all new material, and that's what reconstruction is. This is a Pitkin Town Hall. This is adaptive reuse. I worked on this with a friend of mine. We redid all the masonry work. They put the staircase back on the side that went up to the 2nd floor and a few other things. Preservation, this example where it's not a historic structure, it's a prehistoric structure. And there's cases from back in the day at Mesa Verde where they were trying to stabilize a lot of those, cliff house and things like that. But the methods they used at that time have actually degraded the site, and they've had to go back and take different measures. So here's some questions you have to ask yourself when you're looking at a building and what you want to do with it, and if you want to save it. How much do you want to remain? How much do you want to take away? What period of the structure do you want to represent? And I'll give you an example of that on a project I worked on here in a couple. Meeting code. So there's the ADA accessible code. There's fire codes and things like that I've run into trying to reuse historical structures in a different way that you need to keep in mind. And Then also, oh, sorry. The last thing is, if more people are going to the site, are they going to damage it or wear it out? And a good example of that is Alpine Tunnel, where you have to try to harden a site so that they can't keep walking away with artifacts. And if the site isn't hardened where you feel comfortable sending the public, then it's probably not good to advertise it. So let's get on to a couple sites. This is Pieplant, which Dwayne discussed earlier. This is stabilization. The picture you see in the background is the mill that Dwayne described. I don't know if it was actually that big, but I mean, it was quite a few stories. I don't know if there's 100 stamps or not. This is the road going up to Pieplant, going up into the collegiates. There's the mill again. We did not stabilize. We stabilized the mill a little bit, but we didn't get into the wood or structure. We did a little bit of masonry work just to try to keep it somewhat standing. There are 6 cabin sites there. Here's a typical example of what they look like at this point. We picked the best of the 6 and decided we were gonna fix it. And so we jack it up, we replace sill logs, we cut other trees and skin them, we roll them up planks to make the roof, and or not the roof, but the sill beams. So we only did 1 cabin there just to keep 1 standing. Here's Alpine Tunnel. This is a boarding house, and then the telegraph office next to it in 1944. I believe it collapsed in the 50s. There it is, collapsed in 58, yep. The telegraph office was still standing there at the time. There's inside of the tunnel there's the white fungus that Dwayne was describing when he was down there. There is Ray Rossman. He was the archaeologist here and was a big lead for 20 years and got a lot of volunteers up at the Alpine Tunnel to help up there. I only tied on maybe the last 10, 15 years on helping, but he's retired now, but he did a lot of great work up there, so I wanted to give him a little credit. This is a telegraph office when they first started reconstructing it. Now it's open to the public for people to hike up. It looks great. We had volunteers up there for a number of years, manning it during the week. All those rails in front were laid by volunteers. So I would say the telegraph office itself is more of a restoration. They tried to use as much original material as possible, whereas the tracks would be reconstruction because they just weren't there when we got there. That's volunteers. There's another point I want to make is a lot of these projects, most everyone I speak of, wouldn't happen without the help of volunteers. So I can't thank them enough. And this is another example of reconstruction. So the engine house burned down, I believe around 1905, the one Dwayne was speaking of. And inside the engine house was the turntable. So now they had no way to turn around the engines when they pushed up the train up the passes. So there used to be a turntable here, and it had been, completely torn away. And it was totally reconstructed. We don't have the metal in the middle, but the actual gangplank, and it's a full circle now. And so that's an example of reconstruction. And I want to say about 5 years ago, we had like a microburst and it ripped up like half of it and we rebuilt and put concrete in the ground. There's a picture of it completely done now. And originally in the center, there was a totally balanced metal spring where 2 or 3 men could actually turn an entire engine around. Here's the engine house that burned down. I have pictures from the 50s up till now, and year after year, that wall just disappears. That's what it looked like in 2005. I got a grant. We relined the turntable that was inside. We kind of stabilized and hardened the wall that was left of it so that people stopped walking away with pieces of it. But I don't have any plans to continue working on Alpine Tunnel except to maintain. the last thing that we did is we put up 20 interpretive signs from the town of Courts outside of Pitkin all the way up to the top to give the history of the entire route and things that went on. This has nothing to do with restoration or reconstruction. This is just an example of another mine just down from Pieplant. That's a picture of the Enterprise mine, and the Forest Service acquired this private patent, and it had a tram from close to Dorchester all the way up to almost the top of the divide. And this is something we wouldn't touch because it's in wilderness, and wilderness has some different rules. We are allowed to do restoration and things like that in wilderness, but it has to be a pretty darn good reason. Most of the time, we let these things slowly go away to time. This is an example of a flume. It had a 1.2 mile elevated flume all the way to their power plant. It's actually quite a great sight to walk around. And that's the end of the flume there. On to Fairview Peak. This is the only fire lookout on the Gunnison National Forest. This was a stabilization project at first, and then it turned into more of a restoration project as well. So you can drive to the base of that hill, and then from there you have to hike everything else up on your back. And yeah, I started in 2007-8, and that was just to stabilize it so it didn't fall down. Here's a picture of it shortly after construction. At this time, it did not have a cupola on top, but it was added shortly after, and I don't know what year. I'm assuming it was between 1913 and 1917, because I believe in 1917, it was likely abandoned due to World War I. But I've tried to search the papers, but Dave's going to work on that, digitizing everything. So hopefully I'll find more. Here's a picture hiking up. This was the only picture I have of the cupola still on it. This is from the 1950s. This is what it looked like when I got there. Not much roof left. A lot of holes in the walls. The walls are actually 18 inches thick. So you can see there's a big hole there, but there's still a little bit of wall. That's the old roof that they tore off in the 1960s. They tore off the cupola and the wood roof in the 1960s because they attempted to make this a radio repeater site. And it got struck by lightning too much, and it was very difficult to access, so they abandoned it. Here's a giant hole in the front wall that we fixed. So over the course of 3 to 4 years, I dug up native soil, I packed up lime, I packed up some Portland. So I tried to do the masonry mix as close to original as possible, but I added some Portland just to strengthen the walls a bit. And then you can see the metal anchors hanging down. They were missing a couple, so I had a couple of those recreated to put into that roof plate to hold the roof to the wall. We've come quite a ways on it at this point. It's in a lot better shape. This is before it was still done. I've redone all the masonry work. I took down this whole gable down to that window because the lintel rock was cracked, and replaced the lintel rock and rebuilt the whole gable. Then I put cedar shingles back on it instead of the metal roof. Oh, I'm sorry. I did something wrong. Put on cedar shingles again instead of metal roof, and then started building the cupola up. Now I have windows in it. The windows have survived the past 4 years. The only thing I have left to do is maybe replace the door again because the marmots have eaten it. And I still need to trim the inside of the cupola. And then I think I will be happy because it's really a neat place to stay. That's up on top of it. And it's a nice 1,500-foot cliff if that guy takes a couple more steps. I don't have my, I'm just checking time, sorry. See how I'm doing. Okay. Is that the next one? Okay, that's the next one. This is Alpine Ranger Station. This is probably the second oldest ranger station in the whole Forest Service in the US. It was originally, the small cabin was built in 1907. And then the ranger and his whole family lived up there, and they kind of outgrew it. In 1920, they bought the bigger cabin down in Lake City and transported the logs up and reconstructed it there. It was used pretty good through the 50s, 60s, and then it got totally dilapidated. And I want to say 2009, I got ARA grants, which was America Recovery Act of some sort. And so we went in, and this would be an example of rehabilitation, because the goal of this was to rent it to the public for them to use. And so we put in solar panels, as you can see to the left there. There is a trailer in that shed that I built that has the converter and the batteries and all that that's connected to the house. And then in between the two cabins, put in a bathroom, both pit toilet and flush toilet with shower and on-demand hot water. I put on-demand hot water in the kitchen there as well. So before this, these buildings were just a hand pump outside with no electricity. And I was fine with that, but in order to rent to the public, we had to give them a few more amenities. So this is an example of us, going, I don't want to say Club Med, but it's an example of us, keeping the integrity of the structure and mostly the site, minus the solar panels, and being able to reuse it in a way that will get used by the public. So I guess, here, I'll go on to another. This is for the CB people. This, anyone can guess, it's a structure in Crescent View. You can see Mount Emmons sticking up in the background, the ridge. It's the old CB Ranger Station that the Forest Service disposed of a few years ago. This picture is from January 1st, 1952. So yeah, a lot of snow that January or that New Year's. But we disposed of this, and I'm sure the Crescent Butte Museum members are familiar, know well about Beaux-Arts. But there's a lot of stipulations and contracts and agreements we wrote up before we were able to dispose of this property, because we didn't want them just leveling the building and building something brand new. And if they do add on to this building after they purchase it, it needs to show that it's distinct and separate addition from the original structure. And it can only be so much square footage, I believe, according to Beaux-Arts as well, the addition. But someone could correct me if I'm wrong. This is a building in Gunnison. I know they're going to cover it next week. This is an example. Each of those garage doors weighed like 300 or 400 pounds, and they were on these springs, and the springs kept breaking and doors were flying down. And so we redid the roof, and we also redid the garage doors, and I consulted with SHPO, and we found something that matched and made it look almost exactly the same. And that's right across, this building's right across the street from Gene Taylor's. It was built in the 1930s, and it was a CCC job to get people back to work. Here's a view from the street. Those two little black dots on the side, they had pewter scones that had been broken. And I found someone who could actually weld pewter, and I got them fixed, and now they are actually back up and operational there at the garage. Here's an example of a Cold War era building. This is my office, Gunnison office on Colorado. It was originally determined eligible because of its Cold War. It's a small period in time where they built bomb shelters in the bottom. And so it was an eligible structure, and we ended up doing so many modifications on it that we put on a sloped roof, because originally it had a flat roof, which doesn't make sense here. And then we made a number of modifications, a little bit on the outside, and added another entrance and things like that. So we consulted with SHPO, and now it's not an eligible building. And so I guess kind of what I would finish with is it's all very subjective. I could probably re-record this building and convince the State Historic Preservation Office that it is eligible again. It's all who's in office. And then it's also back to where I started with is, what do you want to do with the building? Do you want to preserve it? Do you want to rehabilitate it? Do you want to restore it? Or reconstruction doesn't count because that's just rebuilding something that's no longer there. And so, yeah, and then again, back to the proposed use, codes and regs, physical condition, and what is the significance of the structure? And if you answer those questions, then you can formulate a plan on how to save that building, perhaps. How am I doing on time? Not too bad. Do you have anything to add, Dave? We still have a little bit of time.
Yeah, I do. If you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just listening to what Justin had to say, and I thought some of the people might be interested in kind of seeing some of this history. And I'll start out with the Denver South Park and Pacific Railroad. I'm a member of the Denver South Park and Pacific Railroad Historical Society. It's a group of about 200 people worldwide, really, believe it or not, that are interested in that railroad. And I know way too much about that particular piece of history. But you might be interested, you know, the Denver South Park and Pacific started in Denver, came through South Park, over Altman Pass through the Alpine Tunnel, and then they were headed to the Pacific Ocean. That was their goal. And if you go to South Park, if you drive to Denver, a lot of you do, and drive along 285, kind of in the middle of South Park, there's a little town called Como, and it's about 2 miles north of 285. You've driven past it many, many times. It's worth turning in there to this little town. And Como was kind of a break point for the railroad, because a junction, because that's where the line split. One line came to Gunnison, the way I was just describing. The other line went over Boreas Pass and down into Breckenridge, Keystone, Dillon, and then over Fremont Pass to get to Leadville. And that's a whole nother story I won't bore you with, but it's fun because you can drive over Boreas Pass in a passenger car. It's a gravel road. And at the top, you'll find the remains of an engine house that's very much the same design, although it's, you know, down too, that was up at the Alpine Tunnel. And there's also kind of a restored section house at the top of Boreas Pass. But the highlight is really right there in Como, where you can see a roundhouse that has been restored. And in front of the roundhouse, there is a turntable, just like at the Alpine Tunnel, that our society is in the process of restoring. And we actually found the metal part that holds the train. And we found it as a truss in a building in Denver. And we believe it's the actual piece that came from that turntable. Anyway, you can go there and see all that. And also there's a depot that about 15 or 20 years ago, it was about 1 or 2 winters from being crushed by snow. And we restored that back to its 1880s grandeur. So it's a pretty neat place to go. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is, you know, preservation and moving buildings. A lot of preservationists say if you move a building, that destroys the historic integrity of the building, and it can't be listed in many times. But if you think about Blue Mesa Reservoir, which was constructed in the early 60s, there were a lot of fishing resorts and ranches all along that 25 miles of the Gunnison River that was covered. And it's amazing the amount of those buildings that exist today. They're scattered all over the place. Most of them are in the Gunnison area, but some of them moved west or toward Montrose and so forth. And one of the most significant ones was called the Sportsman's Resort. And it was probably the best well-known resort of all the resorts. It was started by a guy named J.J. Carpenter in the 1880s as a hunting and fishing resort at the confluence of Savoy Creek and the Gunnison River. It had quite a life all the way from the 1880s all the way until the reservoir was built. And many very famous people came there, John Wayne, Herbert Hoover, to name a couple of them, primarily to fish, because the fishing was so great along the Gunnison River there. Anyway, its main lodge was moved in two pieces and then put back together, and it's now Savoy Creek Apartments, which is just north of Gunnison. You kind of pass Walmart and you pass the bank on the right, and there's a left-hand turn with, I think it's now a yellow house you'll see, and then the next building to the west is the Sportsman's Hotel or Lodge. And it's, if you look at the old pictures, you can look at it and see that building still there. It has a couple of additions. But anyway, there's a couple of places you can see history.
Hey, that was great. Thanks, Dave. I had a couple things to add on to that. About the Alpine Tunnel, it was a race to Gunnison at the time, because as Dwayne mentioned, they thought that each town was going to be a great big mining town. Well, the Denver and South Park started, I believe, in 1879, and then the Denver and Rio Grande decided they wanted to get to Gunnison too, and picked a completely different path and started a year later and beat the Denver South Park to Gunnison by a year because of the time it took to build the tunnel. That was unfortunate, because then the Rio Grande moved on. They took the only track you could get through the Black Canyon. So the Denver South Park had to change their plans, and they attempted to go over Ohio Pass. We're going to go down Anthracite Creek and on to Paonia out into Utah. Obviously, that never occurred. They did put a grade in almost to the top of Ohio Pass pretty much, but they never laid track all the way to the top. The other thing I was going to say is, the integrity. Structures can still have integrity. It's integrity of setting, and that's one parameter of something being eligible or not. So just because the integrity of setting might be gone, it doesn't totally eliminate something from being eligible or not.
Right.
And finally, for our Telluride people, and maybe for Telluride people probably know, Crescent Butte people maybe not. There was a railroad outside of Telluride and up Ophir, and it went over Lizard Head Pass. It was at Denver, South, and Rio Grande. Denver, something like that, I'm sorry. DSR&G, I believe. But they had a trestle at Trout Lake that the Forest Service reconstructed. I don't want to say that was 15 years ago I worked on it. But a little piece of trivia is that Quentin Tarantino filmed a scene on that trestle. And so I was there for monitoring on that. We put plywood over the trestle and then put snow on it and protected it. And the movie company donated some money to the Forest Service for letting us use the Trout Lake Trestle in his. So we made it to 7:44. I guess, should we open it to questions now?
Sounds great. Yeah, so if everybody has a question, please post it either in the Q&A or in the chat. While you guys are posting your questions, just a quick reminder to visit crescentbuttemuseum.com to see what's left in this series and to sign up for the next week's event. All the registration links are open, So go ahead and get that registered. Also, please consider becoming a member to support programming like this. Also, we have a survey at the end of this event. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, if you have not already done so. I recognize many names in our participants, and we're so thrilled you guys keep coming back. So to just start out with, we had a question from Bobby Martin. Where is the Alpine Ranger Station?
The Alpine Ranger Station is located northwest of Lake City. It is still in Gunnison County. There's two ways to get there. There is a road coming right off of 149 that wraps up the plateau quite steeply, or you can turn at the Arrowhead turnoff on Highway 50 and go through Arrowhead and all the way out. And it's about 2 or 3 miles before the Big Blue Wilderness Trailhead.
All right. From Chris Ray, we have, are there any planned preservation projects in the future?
I'd like to finish up Fairview before I tackle other stuff. We've done a few things. I have volunteers that stay at Dorchester Cabin, which was an old ranger station, and before that, a town site in 1910, when they were still taking ore from Taylor Park over, or vice versa. They were taking ore from Aspen over to Taylor Park because they hadn't gotten the railroad yet. That's one. I'm trying to think. I'm tired of being a mule. I've hiked a lot of stuff up Fairview, so I'm finishing that. Alpine. I think the next couple little ones is there's a couple cabins, Keeper's Cabin or maybe Old Agency, that I could fix up and make recreational rentals again for the public. Because that's the only way to really, our seasonals don't use them enough, so it'd be nice to fix them up and just rent them to the public so they could sit there.
That would be great. I'd love to sign up for that.
Can I add something to that now?
Yeah.
In terms of the Historic Preservation Commission, we're working on several projects, but one that is near and dear to me is the digitization of Gunnison City newspapers. And we're in the process of raising funds to do that. It's about estimated about a $25,000 project to digitize newspapers from the earliest in about 1880 all the way to 1924. And as many of you may know, they will then reside on the website associated with History Colorado, and then you can search them, which is the greatest thing, because they're available on microfilm or they're at the Pioneer Museum in paper, but it's hard to find a certain topic unless they're digitized. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Wow, that's a huge project. I'm thrilled.
Al, can I make a comment?
Please do.
I think Dave knows, and Justin also, but at History Colorado, they have got a website called coloradohistoricnewspapers.org. And all you got to do is go to that website and plug in any topic that you want, and whatever was in the newspapers that have been digitized, which are many, that will show up. So if you're looking for Al Johnson of Crystal, you plug that in, and whatever they had in those papers that are available will pop up. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, and that's the same site that the Gunnison newspapers will be on.
So cool.
I see the next question of what projects in the county are you most proud of? I'm proud of all of them. I would say Fairview is the most physically demanding because I was carrying 90, 100-pound bags up multiple times every day. Alpine's great. Alpine Ranger Station is great because the public gets to use it and gets to experience what it was like to be alone as a ranger back in the day a little bit with a lot of amenities. And if I get the Palisade wall fixed back up the Alpine Tunnel, I think I'd be really proud about that.
Bobby Martin asks, what movie did Tarantino use the trestle for? And tell your right.
Oh, I can't remember. The one that was Kurt Russell, Samuel Jackson. He's taken the girl in on a bounty. They get stuck in the cabin. Can't remember the name of it. I can look it up.
Okay.
Let me get my phone. All right. I have IMDb.
While you're looking it up, my personal question is, you know, you're doing these projects in incredibly remote places. You're packing things in. What, I mean, you're rebuilding these massive projects that took a full-on railroad company to be able to, you know, millions of dollars to build in the first place. What has been the most unique strategy that you've come up with, or what have been the ideas and the challenge to be able to face the challenges that you've had to come up with?
In the case of Fairview, we obviously didn't have any electricity. The movie is A Hateful Eight.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
No electricity. Cutting everything by hand. I finally started getting some of those DeWalt cordless or battery DeWalts. Hauled those up there. I mean, it just depends. I won't pick another preservation project where I have to pack everything in again.
I believe it.
Yeah. So those are the challenges, I guess. Also volunteer sometimes, you know. I mean, corralling a bunch of people who haven't done projects like this, you need their help, but you also need to focus them on what they're best at. And still make them feel very proud and accomplished of what they've done and what they helped with.
We've gotten this question a couple times. Where is Fairview Peak?
So it's outside of Pitkin. Between Pitkin and Tin Cup is Cumberland Pass. And so it's due west of that. It's 14,200, or no, not 14. It's 13,400 feet. I think I've hiked quite a few mountains in Colorado, but I think you can see more 14ers from that spot than any other mountain I've been on. Because you start around over in the Elks, you go through all the Elks, the Collegiates, Pikes Peak, Sangre de Cristos, Margaritas, Uncompahgre, and you can see Sneffels picking up or sticking up a little.
Justin, I think one of the easy ways, well, not easy way, but a direct way to get there, did you go up Armstrong Gulch out of Pitkin? Is that how you get up there?
No, that road past my friend's cabin up Armstrong gets crappy. There's a better road.
Okay.
Take Grasshopper up to, what do they call it? I forget all the roads up in that homeowners association. But yeah, there's a Forest Service road that goes directly out of Pitkin as well, but it's rougher than going through Quartz Creek as well, even though we fixed it up a couple years ago.
Okay. Do you need volunteers to carry supplies up to the fire lookout? If so, how can people sign up?
8 or 9 years ago, I would have loved the help, but I have pretty much everything I need up there now. I did all the tough stuff. Like the corner posts on that cupola are actually 4 2x8s each, and we had to make them down in Pitkin and put the 4 together for each post and then carry them up that way so that they were straight. I guess the one other thing that you brought to mind then is on the cupola, I always buy rough cut dimensional lumber because back then, you know, a 2x4 isn't a 2x4 anymore. Where a 2x4 used to be a 2x4. So I buy all my wood from a sawmill and get rough cut and do dimensional cuts. So it's more period. And in the case of Fairview, as you saw on that first picture when they first built it, it didn't have a cupola. And I obviously didn't pick 1913 as the period I wanted. I wanted the cupola on it. So my period is probably 1915, 1916.
So along those lines, do you need volunteers currently for any of your other projects?
Not at the moment. I normally have a good lineup of volunteers, and trust me, I love the help. And please contact me. I'll give you my contact info, and they can call me, and I'll get their info and keep them in mind as things come up. This year, I haven't even been in the office. They don't even tell me when I'm going in the office again. My normal volunteers that come, they've told me that I can't bring them on. They can't come in. So at the moment, everything's a little up in the air, but I do appreciate the support. And I'll give you my contact and you can share it.
And David, do you, for your digitization project or for any of the, I guess this for both of you, for the commission, Historic Preservation Commission projects, do you guys need volunteers for anything upcoming?
Yeah, we often enjoy the help of volunteers, and oftentimes we've been working with students from Western and also RE1J. So that's been a big help, and anybody's welcome to contact myself or Justin, and we could let you know what projects we're working on. Another project that's been a long-term project for us, but we could always use help on, is a goal to document the buildings, the historic buildings in downtown Gunnison, and then put some sort of interpretive sign in front of or on each building, as many towns have done. And that requires, a lot of research. And if you're interested in research, that might be something people would be interested in. Anything, Justin, you could think of there?
No, I'll plug the Gunnison County Historic Preservation Commission again, just to let everyone know that we're available to help with any needs you might have, whether it's listing a property so that you might be eligible for grants or writing letters of support for grants. We've done it for RMBO, we've done it for Crested Butte Museum, we've done it for the Arts Center. So let us know if there's anything we can do.
And the other thing I might mention about the Historic Preservation Commission is a big part of what we consider our mission is educating the public about the importance of historic preservation, basically. And also, we are all lovers of history, of course. And so one of the projects that we undertook a few years ago was to try to document all the historic sites in Gunnison County and put those on a GIS map. And I mean, those sites are anything from railroad grades to town sites to ranches to resorts, mines, the list goes on and on and on. And you can barely see one of those behind me on the wall. It's sort of dark here. But the result was, if you're interested, you can, there are 4 printed maps, and you could purchase them if you want for the cost of printing at the Blackstocks County building, or they're also hung in various areas around Gunnison. So they're pretty interesting. I think that we put together story maps so that you can look at them and read stories on the side and then relate those to the points on the maps.
Yeah, those maps are fantastic. I use them all the time. We've got a couple of things to wrap up this evening. Again, please visit crescentbuttemuseum.com to find out about more programming, to make a donation, to consider becoming a member. Join us next week at Thursday at 7 p.m. when we have architect Jody Reeser and historian David Primus to talk about the 8th Street School, right? I'm looking back at my notes here, as well as the Arts Center. It's going to be really interesting. I'm going to learn a lot. Dwayne, you also had a quick plug that you wanted to put on for this evening.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to be teaching a class on Colorado history for the Colorado Teacher Institute virtually June 8, 9, and 10. And anybody wants to sign up for that, it's 2 hours academic credit, or you can just sit in and go to the Western Colorado website and go to extended studies, and you can get in. We'd love to have you. We're going to be talking about everything from geography all the way up to railroads, ranching, mining, and so on. So it'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again. Thank you to our panelists as well. We really appreciate you guys taking the time and sharing all about historic preservation and so much more in and around the Gunnison country. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Nell.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
You bet.
See you,
Thanks,
Dwayne.
Dave. Thanks,
Justin.
Jason.
All
Thank you.
right. Hey,
Nell,
Dwayne,
yeah.
quick question. Did you ever pick up your Lake City book from my office that's hanging out in the front waiting for you with your name on it?
No. Can I get in?
Yep, you can get in now.
So your Lake City book is at the main office?
Yep, it's sitting in a folder right behind the lady who sits at the front desk.
I'll be in and sign it tomorrow.
All right, we'll
Now,
see you.
listen, well, before you get off the phone, those two pictures you have of the Fairview Fire Tower, though, those are spectacular, and I would love to get a copy of both of them, that one at night and then the one when it's all lit up.
No problem. I'll get those to you.
Okay, well, when you get back in the office.
I got them on my computer at home. I'll get them to you soon.
Oh, great, thank you.
All right, no problem, Dwayne.
Okay, see you guys.
All
Nell,
right, thank
stay
you,
on, I want
everyone.
to talk with you.
Sounds good.
Which one?
Nell.
Okay, I'm
Go on,
getting
talk
off
to
then.
Nell.
I'm leaving. Goodbye.